Hi there, and welcome to a new episode. Today we have a human connection speaker with us, Simone Heng. She is awarded multiple times. In 2020, she was named as one of the top 10 public speaking coaches globally by Yahoo. She has many accolades, but I'm really excited to just have her on, tell her about her, ask you about your journey, of course. Simone, please introduce yourself. Where might the people know you from?
Hi, so I'm based here in Singapore. You might know me from my social media profiles on LinkedIn and Instagram and the like. I used to be a broadcaster as well for many, many years for the likes of like Virgin Radio, and I was on CNN and all these other things. But most recently, since about 2 years ago, I speak to organizations globally on the topic of human connection, which is something the world needs quite a lot of at the moment. So it's worked out well.
What's human connection for you? Is it you're just going around sharing stories? How did you start this idea? Is it just public speaking tips and tricks? Could you elaborate a little bit more?
Yeah, so the public speaking work that I do, that's my B2C work. So it's not totally separate because communication and connection is related, but I define personally human connection as that wonderful energetic exchange that we've all experienced when we can feel, see, and discover ourselves in another human being. So it's a very special, intangible thing when we meet and connect authentically with somebody. It's very special. And the career in this field actually started because I had been a communicator for many years, but I don't think that my work in the media actually taught me a lot about connecting authentically with people. You're connecting in a contrived way. So you have a celebrity interview, it's all set up. So it taught me a lot about communicating, speaking, but not necessarily a lot about connection. So human connection is vital on a much deeper level than just presenting for us. Because when we were in hunter-gatherer societies, early man, we came to evolve in tribes. And that meant that the tribe gave us safety in numbers. So if we were injured and out on the hunt with the other tribesmen would keep us safe and then bring home game for our family. If we were pregnant and we couldn't gather the food with the other women of the tribe, they would gather food, feed our family. And at night when we slept, and this is very relevant to COVID-19, at night when we slept, other members of the tribe would take turns keeping watch over us to make sure that we were safe. So in a scenario where we're cast out of the tribe, which we can see as modern day disconnection and loneliness, a lot of really dark things start to happen. We go into a fight or flight mode, which is of course because we are unsafe. We're not having those safety numbers. That wiring from those days as early man in hunter-gatherer tribes, our brains are still wired that way. So when we perceive ourselves to be alone or we're socially distanced, we have this fight or flight response. We get stress hormones through our body, like cortisol, and that's actually okay as an evolutionary response. It tells us, hey, we need to go out and connect with people. Your loneliness is just your body saying, hey, for your well-being, to get some oxytocin, dopamine, feel-good hormones, you need to go and meet people. But where it's dangerous is if that fight or flight response is chronic over a long period of many years. So those stress hormones are being released chronically in your body. And that is why if you look up any studies on loneliness, people who suffer from loneliness are more likely to have a shorter life expectancy. Loneliness is actually more dangerous for us than diabetes and smoking. So it's very, very important that you have strong human connections. So you can see the difference there. Yes, public speaking is important. Public speaking is the structure, the external capsule, I call it, of what I do. But the message, the medicine inside that capsule of human connection is far more important to our survival, which is why, corporations would hire me to come in and speak about it, because it's far more vital than the prescriptive stuff, than the how to speak clearly and all of those other things, which I share in my B2C work, which is with your Instagram following and whatnot. But the stuff that I do with leaders and I do with executives at corporations, and try and bring a bit of it online on social media when I can, writing the book on it at the moment, that human connection stuff is really quite vital to our survival as a species, our thriving as a species.
That Yeah, that started a bit sooner than I thought in the mental well-being of it all. We're covering a lot of topics that I thought we'd be covering actually a bit later, but I'm really happy we're covering them now. So everything you just mentioned seems like the standard life of a sole founder of any company. As they grow, it becomes almost more lonely. You also become more disconnected the more people you have within your company, just having a small circle of your managers. But then at the end of the day, when things hit the fan, it's still your problem. So you mentioned at one point, like, if it lasts for a long time, if it becomes a chronic thing, that becomes a problem. Have you had in the past clients maybe where you've seen this happen? How did you go about solving this? Yeah, what do you normally teach in that situation?
So obviously I'm a founder myself, which we'll get into how I basically tackle this problem in my own life or implement things into my own life. But the reason I have seen this happen is because it's happened to me. So if you've seen one of my keynotes online called The Future of Human Connection, it trended on Instagram. This speech talks about a time in my life where I had returned from living in Dubai, working as a broadcaster, to take care of my mum who'd had a stroke. And culturally, as Asian children, it's kind of ingrained in us that we're meant to do this. And so I felt this huge guilt and shame from having been an expat, and then like I owed my mum something. So I was carrying this already, right? So these are already for a 30-year-old who had everyone else, their parents are still alive and well. My father was already passed away by then. I'm already carrying kind of what I perceive to be an isolating scenario in my mind. I already have got a seed of this thing of, I don't think other people will understand what I'm going through, which is a dangerous seed to have. And then I get back, and not only are we taking care of my mum and getting her into a facility where as a disabled person she can be cared for because she's now paralyzed, I then have this added duty of taking care of 70 years worth of my mother and father's stuff in this huge family home that my parents bought when they migrated to Australia. And babe, I'm telling you, it was so confrontational to see how my mother had unraveled. She'd become a hoarder. She'd filled this house with stuff. But the act of me being alone in that house for 6 months, quit my job on the radio in Australia, cleaning from the morning to the night, became an additional isolating circumstance. So if you can imagine a founder that works all crazy hours alone, imagine that I was now doing that, except the work that I was doing was not what I am created for. I'm a creative by nature. So I'm doing work that doesn't inspire me, that doesn't, as Johan Hari says, touches no part of who I am. 9 to 5, I'm doing that kind of work. At the same time, nobody of my age, I perceive, understands the kind of horrific things that I'm seeing in that house. And I start to then stop socializing, I start self-isolating, and I'm an extremely social person by nature. So I came out of that experience thinking if this could happen to me, and I could feel this chronic stress, and I went to my doctor and I said to him, look, I want to take the depression survey. I think there's really something, I am not myself. And I finished the survey and he said to me, Simone, you're not depressed, but you need to go back to a place where you can do what you were created to do. Like you need to get out of. And I had never associated stress with loneliness, right? But I know how it feels in my soul, in every crevice of my body. I know how loneliness creates stress now, that the doctor had to tell me it was a link. And then when I started speaking of human connection, I was like, oh, so this is logistically, pragmatically why when we're lonely, the brain creates a stress response. Now I get it. But at that time, I didn't have any of that knowledge. So I actually started to think I was going crazy. And I wasn't talking to any people my age. I would spend all of my social time with older people in the nursing home, when I'd visit my mum. So let's use that as an analogy for the life of a startup founder. You are spending every minute in your office working crazy hours. You have interaction with people who work for you. Now, that's very different to people who are your chosen friends, where there isn't an additional level of complication to that relationship. I'll give you an example. A friend of mine is a very successful chef here in Singapore, and F&B hours are crazy. They're like startup hours. You know, you're working weekends, Christmases, birthdays, New Year's, and your friends become the people who work in the restaurant with you, except for one big problem. He could never talk to them when he needed to be supremely vulnerable. If the business wasn't doing well, he could never talk to them because they were being fed by him a salary. And so that becomes an extremely isolating place to be, just in the same way that it was extremely isolating thinking no one could understand my parental issues at the time. So the antidote to that problem is really that you need to cultivate friendships outside of your startup. And I know that seems almost impossible because of the hours that we work. There was a point in Q4 of last year that I was pitching for a project, which hopefully I can reveal soon, but I was pitching for a project, developing that pitch while running the business, and my assistant became my best friend. But I could see how, if that was prolonged over years, how making my closest employee my best friend could start to get really blurry in the boundaries, and I could find myself in a position where I couldn't talk to her about things that were happening that were worrying me that had anything to do with affecting her salary. So the antidote to all of that is you need to have friends, connections beyond the workplace.
Maybe to go a bit deeper into that, because I tend to meet a lot of founders. Well, it's kind of split, but I do tend to meet some founders that are quite introverted and very proud. So I'm one of them. How would you advise, especially maybe in the first 3 years of the business, how would you maybe convince them that this is important? Obviously, I've been doing it for a while, so I definitely understand that this is super important, what you're saying. But how would you convince someone in the first 3 years, they kind of know it's important, but they're an introvert, they're happy with what they're doing, they're getting a lot of positive feedback from the growth they're experiencing. How would they go about making that connection, asking from a perspective from someone who isn't social?
Yeah, look, I believe whether you're an extrovert or an introvert, the science shows we all need connection. You know, that even if, and by the way, self-chosen solitude is really important and it's really healthy. And that's a different subject to enforced social isolation, which is what we've been experienced. Different things happen to us in that context. So yes, as introverts, you need your time alone. Even me as an extrovert, as I get older, I need more and more time alone. But if someone's really driven first 3 years of their business and their primary concern is not to be connected, but it is to drive the growth of their business, just think, how much information have you learnt simply by the act of doing this podcast, okay? So if they could see the leverage in their own growth from making human connections and the benefit to their business, it's a twofold return on investment. For that hour you spend with someone who's cleverer than you or knows more than you about a particular subject, not only if they are a like-minded person, you're going to get inspiration, connection, feel-good hormones like dopamine and oxytocin, which is a social bonding hormone. You're going to get that. But you're also going to get, between the lines of the conversation, incredible tips on how to do your business better. If your mind is making the connections with what they're saying, you're also getting things that are going to drive the growth of your business. Human connection is, it's twofold ROI for your time. Versus if you read a book, which is a one-way exchange, yes, you'll get the knowledge, but you're also not going to get the feel-good hormones that your body, your physiology actually needs. So those are the things. I interviewed actually for a podcast I did for Salesforce, which is a huge global organization. I was hosting their podcast and I got to interview a fantastic marketing executive. And he said to me, the one thing that I miss in terms of business, even though we were doing a lot of flying, it wasn't great for the environment, but the problem solving that would come up in the conversations between the conversations. The bumping into someone at the elevator, or the meeting somebody, the inspiration that would happen incidentally through your day's journey that would lead to innovation to solve a problem within the organization was priceless. And you're not having those serendipitous moments anymore because we are scheduling our days around video conference. I myself now, with our new way of working, know exactly where I'm going to be at every single 15-minute increment of my day. But the best inspiration I get for ideas for social media content marketing for the business, or keynote speeches, anecdotes for things, text for my book that I'm writing, it's all from those accidental moments, walking the dog, watching something, and we're missing that. So human connection is also fantastic for problem solving and innovation.
How would you elaborate this? How would you explain this to a fully virtual company? Like, for instance, I know Automatic, the people behind WordPress and stuff like that, they are very proud to be fully virtual and everything. I know they do obviously events for their employees, but how would you handle a virtual business, or how would you tell them to connect better and create moments like that?
Sure. So my business at this stage is almost fully virtual. I had one speaking gig in person 2 weeks ago, and now we've gone back into phase 2 in Singapore. So we're on the edge of another lockdown. And so my keynotes are all online. I'm working with you right now from a studio in my house, but I try and infuse that connection in. So I do dinners with I have a very small team, nothing on the scale of WordPress, right? But I make sure that we do dinners, that we try and see each other face to face. And a lot of the times when I get brought into organizations, it's the exact scenario that you're describing. It's to bring an element of engagement into, human connection into employee engagement. So if you're in an office where, your business is online, but maybe you are still working in, small pods or teams. Have you in Europe gone back to offices yet? Or you still work from home?
No, so in the Netherlands it's pretty bad still. Although they are slowly opening up restaurants, but like for instance, I still haven't received my vaccine, and I'm expecting probably to get it in July or something. So I'm in the Netherlands. I know that Germany's pretty screwed up as well. So Europe is not the best, but I know that the UK is doing well.
So I guess let's talk about two different scenarios: the fully virtual organization, and then the kind of small pod working, small medium enterprise where you have a small team, which is like me. So in those cases, a group dinner after work is fine. A one-day mental health day where you can do half day team bonding, half day people just have half the day off.
And that's all physical?
So I would actually, obviously the half day where they have the half day off, they're on their own, but the half day where you're together, absolutely, if you can do physical, if your country allows you, your body needs it. You need the oxygen. If you're vaccinated and you're allowed to, I don't know what the different laws are like because in Asia it's very strict, but if you're allowed to hug your freaking team member, your body needs the oxytocin, do it. When we're looking at the fully virtual organization, like you've mentioned, particularly here in APAC in Singapore, we have the headquarters for global organizations, and I just moderated a panel with the president of Microsoft Asia, and he was talking about they've given, because it's a virtual environment, everyone's working from home, what they've done to allow people to have human connection within their families is they've just given everyone 5 extra leave days a year, and they gave them a full Friday off. Also, a large proportion of their workforce is in India, and obviously India has been hit tragically by COVID. So allowing people to spend more moments with the human connection within their home is still a way to get more feel-good human connection, and you're doing it safely as well. So that's the two tactics that I would go. Either way, the aim is just to get people, introverted or not, to have a little bit more of what we were used to pre-COVID for their mental health and their well-being.
How long?
Oh, so the irony of this, right? We're all socially distancing ourselves to prevent the spread of a virus, but the act of socially distancing ourselves is also lowering our immunity over time if we're in chronic stress mode. It's just so ironic, like when you know the science of how connection works.
You've been diving deeper into the human connection science as well, and obviously just experience. And now this happened, which is, in our lifetimes, we've never expected something so crazy to happen. So,
well, Bill Gates did, besides Bill Gates.
Well, yeah. Actually, it was more than Bill. I think every pandemic specialist predicted it would happen, and that it would happen in China. just because of those markets. I was actually in China a couple of years ago. Um, it sounds awful, but I'm not surprised because hygiene in some places are just non-existent. But apparently, if you read any pandemic specialist about it, it's been crazy. But I think we're getting now into a point where the vaccines are rolling out, so that's super nice. I heard the other day Pfizer came out with a potential pill that can
Oh, wow.
um, fix those things. So I don't know if that's actually happening. But back to the whole human connection thing, because not a lot of people covered the other side of what is happening right now, which is the mental well-being, the isolation, how to deal with all of this with just this screen connection that we're having right now, for instance. From your experience and whatever the science tells us, I don't know if you've dived deeper into that, how long can someone be in isolation without going crazy? And are there any long-term effects, do you think?
Well, I think there are definitely long-term effects. If you've ever watched the Khalif Browder story on Netflix about a guy who had a teenage brain, not a fully developed brain, went into Rikers Island, was put into solitary confinement. I can't remember that it wasn't very long, and what that did to his brain permanently. I mean, so the answer is, I don't think there is a specific amount of time. It's more about the conditions, right? Like if I was to put you right now into solitary confinement with no windows and no light, that's going to be very different from 1 month doing that versus 1 month in socially distanced in your home, or 1 month in a hotel doing quarantine. And it also depends on your pre-existing mental health issues or mental health status. So I had a mentor of mine take his life in quarantine this April of last year. He was repatriating back to Australia from Dubai, and that was heartbreaking. But what I now know is that he had pre-existing mental health issues that we didn't know about. It was very, very heartbreaking. So if people are on the edge, isolation absolutely pushes people closer to the edge. This we know. I interviewed a neurologist for my, a neuroscientist for my YouTube, a guy called Dr. James Cohn, and he's from the University of Virginia. Incredible guy. And he was saying that the reason we feel better when other people are with us is our brain actually perceives that we have more bioenergetic resources. So when you just feel more comfort in a crisis because someone's with you, or you feel you can climb a higher mountain because someone is with you, your mind is literally calculating your resources plus theirs. So actually the term I is incorrect. It's a we. Your brain sees you as a we. So connection is literally what we're here for. It's how we're wired, for love and connection. We cannot become the best version of ourselves without it. It's so ingrained into us.
If I look back at kind of my career as well, one of the things that I kind of wanted to formulate for myself what could be a successful way to switch your career into entrepreneurship. And one of the things that I found quite valuable is I had my girlfriend kind of with me from the beginning almost, and somehow in the back of my mind, I didn't like say it out loud or something, but in the back of my mind I always thought, I feel like this would have been impossible if not for her, even though she wasn't an entrepreneur or something. But it feels like what you're describing right now is that effect. Do you feel like if you see a young founder, you'd rather explain to him or her, hey, maybe it's first you should be figuring out your love life, health, all of that stuff before you embark on this crazy journey?
I think, look, so I'll talk, because you talked about your relationship. I was single for 8 years before meeting my partner at the exact same time I left broadcasting to become an entrepreneur. And there is no doubt in my mind, having been single for almost a decade, about how much more stressed I was, not just about small things that would happen at work, but also by feelings of like I didn't have enough emotional resources for certain incidences that were happening with my mum's illness. The minute I was with him, I feel like I have, essentially when we say emotional support, but your mind is literally going, I have more resources here. I have a backup. I have a teammate. But do I think that they should only enter entrepreneurship once they have a partner? No, because entrepreneurship also breaks up a lot of partnerships. I think that let it serendipitously come to you when it's meant to, but don't treat it as if it's not precious when it does come. Please allocate, because I know what it is to have a business. Please allocate your resources. Like I have block-out times where I give my time to my partner and we're together. The other thing that I wanted to explain to you, which is incredible, I can't remember the person the study comes from, but this is incredible and it factors in what we're saying. There are 3 orbits of loneliness, okay? The first orbit is called intimate loneliness, and this is a yearning for a partner, okay? Boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever you like. The next orbit of loneliness is relational loneliness, and this is to do with close friends and family. So these are people who might be yearning to mend family ties that are fractured, or who feel they were abandoned by their family. These people who are lonely for good friends, because maybe they have really good family members, but they don't really have friends outside the family. That orbit's really important. And the final orbit is actually all to do with what you've done at Startup Funding Event, and that's called collective loneliness. That's people who have the other orbits, but are yearning for a group of people who share their mission and their purpose. So if we can align all 3 of those orbits, we are well on our way to becoming the highest integration of ourselves. And I really have seen the difference in my life when I didn't have those 3 orbits, or one was always missing, and when they all became aligned, I was able to really fly. And when I say fly, I mean my cup runneth over. I felt that I had so much energy, acceptance, love, connection in my life that I could then be of service to other people and give to other people. So just being aware of those 3 orbits should help you understand that you need different rungs. Like having friends at your startup who work with you, who take a salary from you, who are also your best buddies, may not always feed you. It might work for now, but we should try to cultivate good even spread along those 3 rungs.
What I find interesting is kind of what everybody knows who's leading a team, but you're almost speaking about a healthy emotional separation between you and your employees, because a lot of tech industry especially talks about family and everything creating within your business. How realistic is creating a family in your business?
So I get obviously asked to speak at loads of tech companies and loads of organizations, and I think that that's the dream and that's the mission. But I think if you go and you ask the employee at the organization, do they feel it's a family? So you're not going to make everyone happy. Yeah, so maybe 60% do, but all people are different, right? So a corporate mandate, an organization's mandate, a mission is a mission, but we have to be really realistic and really talk to the employees in a space where they feel safe, where they could say whether they feel that way or not. And I've spoken for a lot of organizations, and I think it's very different depending who you're speaking to on the team. But I admire that it's a culture that is being cultivated, because I've worked at great brands. When I worked at Virgin Radio, we were like a family, but it was like Melrose Place. I'm being very 90s right now. What is a reference from your childhood that I could use? I don't even know what you guys watch now. I have no idea. I don't think you watch anything. But anyway, it was like people were dating each other. It was too incestuous almost. Like it was just people were dating each other and like fighting, and like, yes, we were family, but it was too close. And so I made a healthy separation with that, which I'm grateful for that I did. And I saw one of my upper managers doing it as well, because it was just too exhausting on his wife and his marriage, having to go to all the parties with these people that were half his age and do whatever. So Then I worked for another organization on the other hand, which was deeply toxic, that couldn't have given a crap if anything even resembled family. They were out to exploit and squeeze us. So I think a happy medium would be good. But the mandate should not be about projecting an image of family or projecting an image of a certain culture. The mandate should be asking your employees, do they feel connected with the company's mission, with their own well-being and health, with their relationships at the home that they're having to probably work from home from right now, and with a sense of connectedness with their intimate partner. They're the real questions.
How are you going through the whole, last 2 years now, the whole isolation?
So it's interesting. So I left in July of 2019, and I was immediately, with this new startup of mine, immediately speaking on stages around the world, flying to Canada, crazy things, and then had all these gigs booked, and then boom, it happened. And then was alone at the time in my apartment, was not living with my partner yet like I do now. So I was alone in a 1-bedroom apartment, and then just started using the internet to build, and used that curiosity of sharing this message online to distract myself from the anxiety that I had, that will money come in, how will I survive? It ended up being the best thing that I could have done, because then obviously when companies loosened their belts and they had budgets for speaking again, I was the person that they called on. But it was also amazing because I could give away a lot of free education online, and being of service to other people is one of the number one ways to allow yourself to feel less alone. So if I could serve people online and give them tips so they could get jobs in the recession that I knew would follow COVID, yeah, in my little 1-bedroom apartment, that made me feel less alone. It was a wonderful thing. So success without service is hollow. There needs to be some element of giving back. So that really helped me. But also I think I'm just super resilient, because I've watched my dad die in front of me. I've dealt with my mum becoming paralyzed. And I think when you go through those sorts of things, no one was dying in my family. And so as a result of that, it was relatively okay for me to manage. Yeah.
Do you find that if you have resilience like that, it becomes easier to deal with the obstacles that a career can throw at you?
So I do and I don't, and I have just to be truthful here, because even with all of the stress that I was dealing with my mum's stuff, the toxicity of that former workplace, I was in such a fight or flight mode that it actually made it more difficult for me. However, I do believe once a trauma or a difficulty is passed and you've processed it, and then resilience can set in, so you've had space from it, then I do think having resilience like that is the biggest gift. Like, trauma is a gift. Like, it will allow you to be of help to your other friends because you've been through things, you have advice and wisdom to give. Resilience is just like, it's a gift that keeps on giving. However, if you're in the eye of the storm, so you're dealing with illness while you're dealing with workplace issues, at the same time, things are ongoing, that is almost unbearable. You know, that's just bad, very bad timing. And now we're seeing a global pandemic that has thrown so many people into dealing with those two things at the same time. Maybe loss of work plus illness in the family. This is a global extractor of empathy and compassion, this experience.
I'm very interested because you're also, restarting almost your business from what I hear as this whole thing rolled around, everything paused, you had to reinvent yourself. We have probably a ton of people listening in who are maybe freelancers, young coaches, stuff like that. I know a lot of people that are in corporates trying to think maybe they should switch, start becoming entrepreneurs. We've had past podcast speakers who were literally about to transition from a huge position in a corporate to entrepreneurship. What did you do having such a physical career? You have to go somewhere. What did you do? How were your first months like? Yeah, could you elaborate maybe a bit more?
Sure. I mean, I'm sure you've had other people who believe in content marketing on here before me, but I'm a big believer because I've seen how little I've had to struggle for example, for coaching clients or speaking gigs versus people who haven't built an online presence. You know, my numbers are not even that big, but I would like to think that my content speaks to a very specific person. And just the number one thing, I mean, I'm going to sound like Gary Vee here, but like just add value. Like if you are an expert in anything, you're a coach, you're even a consultant or an executive, and you can be, depending on how corporate you are. So if you're very corporate, showing up on video might not be your thing. Writing articles on LinkedIn might be your thing. But if you can be doing something every week, even more if you can, to show your expertise and knowledge in the field, you'll be the first person people call on, even if there are other people who speak on my topic and have a very different slant on it. There's a guy in Canada who speaks on human connection only in relation to romantic relationships, for example. So he's got a different perspective on it. And he puts that content out there. So when they're looking for that speaker, they would go to him. I talk obviously about East-West communication, also the intersection of mental health and a lack of human connection. And people can only come to me for that because I put out so much content about that. And so if you want to be found in a time of mass retrenchment, the easiest way is just devote a day a week to batch recording that content and just getting it out there and trying to not get it out there to promote you and your services, but get it out there to enrich other people's lives with the guise that you're okay to give away your best stuff for free. I give my best stuff away for free all the time and I still get loads and loads of clients. It's a generosity of spirit that comes back, but I also think it allows potential clients to see what they're getting. Today I got a message on LinkedIn from a woman in Australia who said, "Hi Simone, we worked together once when you lived in Dubai," which is like almost 10 years ago now. And then she said, "I was just in a meeting where some key stakeholders were discussing, you know, whether to reach out to you to speak at an event, and I remembered you fondly and thought I'd add you. I don't have a stake in deciding, you know, who they choose, but I wanted to connect on LinkedIn." And it was a beautiful message, and it's just a reminder that if you put your content out, just like you're doing right now for this podcast, you don't know who's looking at it and who is potentially deciding to give you business. So that's my advice in a time of great volatility in terms of employment.
Do you find it's really difficult to break through though? Because we hear this advice everywhere. I mean, you mentioned Gary Vee, and he's like, "Oh yeah, blast your things everywhere, all social media at the same time." But don't you feel like, let's say you said once a week, don't you feel like you put it out and it just vanishes into the sea of billions of other content pieces?
No. So I say that because for two things. I used to use social media like a media personality, which is all about me, I. And yes, when I did that, it would vanish. Because the truth is, after you're in your 30s, no one's going to tell you you're pretty on your photos anymore. That's not your demo anymore, sweetheart. And once I flipped my mindset into being a content creator and doing things to help people, it's totally different. Like the DMs that I get, the connection that there is. So my guess is maybe the content that's going out is more self-serving than others-driven. If you can just weight it towards more others-driven, it doesn't matter what you look like, what age you are. If you're adding value to your particular niche, find out who your audience is, check your insights, you're going to see traction. I have a girlfriend who last year left to start her business right at the beginning of COVID, March 2020, with her husband. They went into lockdown for 11 months in Melbourne. World's longest lockdown. She created content. It went viral on TikTok. She was featured in the New York Times. She has 1 million followers now. She's now like just won the Adweek Content Creator for Careers of the Year. And she's a super awesome chick as well. We met in Bali before this whole thing happened, and I was telling her, I can't wait for you to be your own founder, like have your own company. And when I see that, I think, wow, and her content is different. She is giving career strategy advice to people in a time of great retrenchment, right? So it's hitting the spot, it's very prescriptive, it's very sharp, it's based on neuroscience. And no one else was doing that. So you are looking online and you're thinking, all the content that there is has already been done. If you can amalgamate your existing brand values with content that you're an expert at, you can still carve a niche. That's the big thing that no one talks about, that Gary Vee doesn't talk about. So public speaking had been done before, but no one made it look fun and glamorous. And I wanted to make it that shiz look fun and glamorous. I wanted to shop online. I wanted to be a woman of color telling people how to speak, not an old white guy telling people how to speak. Like, we'd seen that before. And so simply because my brand was different, it cut through. Sure, it's not 1 million followers like my friend, but it's enough to generate 6 figures for my business. So if we're looking at it like that, then it's still a worthwhile thing to try. So just have a look at, how is your brand different? Your background, cultural, a lot of my human connection work has a cultural slant that we haven't seen before, has also got I'm based in a different part of the world. I'm a voice out of Asia. I'm an Asian woman. So how can you take what's different about you, okay, and then a subject matter that you're an expert in that might have already been done before, and you put that perspective onto it. My speaking mentor speaks on creativity and innovation, and in his keynote speech, he says, creativity is not a whole new idea. It's an amalgamation of 2 or 3 existing ideas. That's it. And build your niche around that.
You covered something really interesting from an analytics point of view. You have a very different niche. You said like in Asian women, and then there's a lot of white guys. Do you find that you then also attract the white guys like the other people in your industry, or does carving a niche mean that you attract completely different people?
No, what I've actually done by looking at actually my insights is, like, I've empowered a group of people that wasn't being spoken to yet. So within my market, within Singapore. So prior to leaving the radio, my majority followers were middle-aged Asian men. I think they thought I was attractive or whatever. And they must have, because I wasn't really putting out any very interesting content. So that must have been what it was about. And then when I started I knew who I wanted to attract. I knew who I was inside that wasn't showing up properly online. Started changing a little bit the colors that were being used on Instagram. I started speaking directly to that woman that is my age bracket. So now if we look at the analytics, it's 25 to 34 women based in Singapore is like almost 70% of the followers. So I think on LinkedIn it's different too though. But I'm just talking on Instagram because the insights are a bit easier. And so those particular men and the people who followed them would not find me, I would not breathe life into them the same way. But for my human connection stuff, it's very, very different, because organizations, they can't control their employees the way you can carve a niche out of your followers. Their employees are there for really important reasons and running different positions in the company. So, you have to twist your content a bit to serve that audience. And what's really fascinating is I always thought it was just going to really be organizations maybe within Asia that was really strong, but increasingly more and more US, UK keynotes are coming my way, which I wasn't expecting. But it proves a point, it proves a point that I've been saying to my followers for a long time, is having a global vernacular. Don't think that you're just an Asian in Asia. We live in a global economy now, so your appeal is global.
Yeah, I like that. And yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to know as well. If you're carving that niche, do you then also kind of shift your message, which you do, you target then women around?
I don't actually shift the message, but I shift the case studies and the examples. And I think that's really important. So I recently did a speech with predominantly Australian male audience, and I told a story about my dad, and I put normally there's a part of this story that I use a customer that came to my dad's shop and he's British and he liked English Premier League football. But when I told the story for them, I just made that customer Aussie because my dad did have very many Aussie customers, and I made the sport AFL football. So I think it's just about tweaking without being inauthentic.
Do you find that if you are, let's say, completely different, let's say a white 60-year-old man, can this person still connect with a 25-year-old Asian woman on these topics by creating case studies that are relevant, or do you find that that's just this person just needs a different niche?
Oh, no, sorry, I think we're a bit confused here. So I'm talking about using an example in a keynote speech. So what are you asking in what context? Do you mean social media?
Yeah, I mean, when people are starting their own careers, you've really crafted this niche, and Asian women seem to respond to you, which is really nice. And because they respond, it gets spread, and then non-Asian women or even men get flocked to it as well because you have great content. If you have a white man who's a bit older, he's starting this new career, would you tell, I mean, it could be also a black man or an Asian man, whatever, but would you tell this person to then go towards a white, black, or Asian male audience of his age? Or if they're like, no, but I don't like other white men type of thing, so I only want to hang out with like women. So do you find that they could enter that niche somehow, or do you feel it's a bit inauthentic if they do that?
Well, so you've got to think of it in a couple of ways. Firstly, is this person emerging right now with no following and starting from scratch? So if they are, they need to start throwing content out there for the niche that they feel they speak the best to, not the niche so much that they want to procure, but the niche, and it could be different. They could start putting out videos and get their analytics back and attract a totally different niche because maybe who they wanted was not who they were. I always thought that I was really connected to Asian women when I was even at the radio, but obviously I was alienating them. I was attracting men. So sometimes we don't know what we don't know until we try, which is why people like Gary Vee always say, just start, right? Because you don't know. I don't think it's inauthentic, if we're talking from a business point of view, I don't think it's inauthentic to target a part of the market that we can, as the definition I shared earlier was, that we can see, feel, and discover ourselves in. That's connection. When your followers can see themselves reflected in you, in the way you talk, in your values, your story, your vernacular, your appearance, when they can see themselves reflected, well then, of course they're going to follow you. This is why people like Rachel Hollis in the US have a huge, like, white, middle-class mummy following, because she is a mirror to these people, essentially. However, anyway, without digressing, that's what I love about the internet, because it's niche casting versus what I did as a broadcaster, which meant diluting your values, your story, and everything to appeal to as many people as possible, shaving off all your hard edges that might deter anyone, to be as likable as possible to the biggest mass of people as possible. And I think as the years went on, that almost destroyed me, because it meant you had to be very vanilla. You couldn't share a message that was polarizing. Why I absolutely love niche casting on the internet is that you can really speak about things you're passionate about and not worry if you deter people who don't resonate with that message. For example, I'm not a fitness person. It would be deeply inauthentic for me to post fitness pics and videos. I attract the kind of woman who is like me, the one that reads books, is outspoken. So I think the niche you're going to attract has to see a little bit of themselves in you, unless you're a half-naked Instagrammer, and no shade there at all. But then obviously, if you're highly sexualized, you're going to attract a male audience, right? If it's bikini pics and things like that. But if I'm talking about like startup founder, employee, content creator, not in that guise, then this advice applies.
Yeah, I like what you're sharing. It's very pretty logical actually, and you're giving also quite some practical examples. Um, I would like to hear from your perspective what it was like to start your business and grow it to the point where you are. And what I really like that you mentioned actually is, you're not talking about a seven, eight, nine figure business. A lot of people who enter business, they want to become multimillionaires. That's like the goal, and otherwise, you don't matter. I was actually talking the other day with my coach about this. But a six figure business is way above average. And I think you're part of the 1% when you hit like two or 300,000 or something like
For
that.
women, at least, yeah. Yeah, for women, yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so, what I really, really like that you mentioned is you can build a very healthy, good value business for clients, uh, and make six figures. That's a really good number. That's a crazy number, actually, if we're really honest. It's you need a ton of employees to start hitting seven, eight figures. When we started growing like crazy, so much stress comes with that, which is that even worth it? The question arises at one point. Unless it is your hobby. Like for me, I love building, I love puzzling, and I think if I would quit, I'd probably keep doing this because that's what I was doing when I was a child. Um, so I would love to kind of hear from your perspective as a woman, because I'm not a woman, so I don't know, but I know that we have a lot of women listening. I know that I've actually invested into a woman founder. She started a language school. So I'm noticing, and we did a women in tech event, and I'm noticing a completely different mindset towards business. Almost, maybe I'm generalizing, but the event was pretty big, so I've seen quite some women founders. Um, but it feels less aggressive towards business, yet they're still getting there. And when I look at how men handle it from my friends and stuff like that, it's a much more aggressive approach towards business. Again, generalizing, of course. But I would like to hear from your perspective. How is it like as a woman to start a business? You're probably talking to other women founders. What were some pitfalls you were going through? How did you get through it? Could you kind of shape the first year? How was it for you?
Well, obviously not even 2 years of the business now, and COVID has been like my best friend throughout it. So I think the attitude for me personally is about freedom. So I had a lot of stress in my broadcasting career for very small money. And it is amazing to me with e-commerce. And I sell things organically, right? We haven't even started boosting Facebook ads yet. I think when we do that, we'll get to 7. But the challenge is not actually about the number. The challenge is how much can I make with the least amount of stress? So I have, so that's actually my challenge. It's nothing to do with telling people that you did an $80 million year, which I've seen loads of male founders, like they love that, right? I went into entrepreneurship much later in life than you. So I was 35. So I knew very clearly that for my health and well-being, because of the health of my parents and what I saw, stress, it has to be the least stress. So even the girls that I have, they're not full-time employees because I don't want the stress of paying their CPF, which is the version of like their retirement plan, which then takes away from my profits when they're very happy to be freelancing for other people as well and doing what they need to do for me. It's all about how do I generate the most income, the largest margins, so everything, none of my products are tangible. Everything is intangible, which means no logistics. So many girls set up blog shops and clothing things, like no logistics, no impact on the environment, no physical place I have to be. I mean, that was really the dream. Like, what would pure freedom look like to me? And how much money could I make with this pure freedom idea? And that's actually what turns me on. Like, how do I work that puzzle out? How do I get that Rubik's Cube to get to 7 figures, and still maintain very similar life to what I have right now. And so that's where I come from it. And I think a lot of female entrepreneurs are mission-led. purpose-led. I mean, I'm making a vast generalization. I do think that being ambitious about money and talking about money, like I know a few coaches that do 6-figure months with like a 1+1 business model, which is really amazing. And they will write about it in their captions on Instagram because they're trying to obviously get other coaches to work with them and they coach them as business coaches, right? So obviously they're sharing their results. But it was interesting that the response to a woman writing what figure she's making in a caption, the vitriol that created. And so but even for me, because I was in broadcasting and I kind of know what's likable and unlikable, I even don't write my figure. Like I'll say 6 figures, 5 figures. I have no issue saying that. But actual numbers, I'm not comfortable, particularly with all the suffering that's going on, putting that out there. But I found it very interesting, the reaction to when a woman is ambitious about figures and putting it out there. So that's one takeaway that I can tell you, is that it's definitely not as accepted. And on the other hand, I think that there is a lot of camaraderie that I found. So one thing, when we talk about collective purpose, probably about the 6th month in, when the business just kind of took off, like because I had done all the social media groundwork for a year before I left. So I basically stopped posting on LinkedIn any of my radio stuff about a year when I knew I was making the exit. So for all intents and purposes, people on there thought I already was a speaker. And then I was ready to take bookings. So when that really took off, a lot of my friends from the entertainment industry and the media industry were kind of, I think, a little bit threatened. They felt like I was pulling away, that I was leaving them. I didn't feel I could really talk to them about the nature of being a business owner or about the kind of business that it is when you run a speaking business. And so I found women online, one of them that I mentioned to you before. I found 3 women, one in the UK, one in Australia, and one here in Singapore. And I found women online who were similar age, similar scale of the business. And I started in COVID throughout that whole year, just videoing with them, and we just catch up online. And so I can have that cohesion, and there privately we can talk numbers and we can talk online products and Facebook ads and share resources. And that is a beautiful place that just stopped me from feeling very alone on the journey, because most women my age, I'm 37, are just having their 2nd kid now, and they're very much married, and they're actually releasing the reins of work. I say most women, there are of course exceptions, but in my circles. And that started to be I could not talk to these people about work and my business baby. So that's my takeaway.
Where did you find those women?
Online, Instagram, LinkedIn, saw something that they did that I connected with, saw a little bit of myself in them. One of them actually connected with me and then was in Singapore and came to a speech I did, and then we became really good friends. The other girl I mentioned, she happened to be in Bali when I was in Bali, and she lives in Melbourne, and then we met. And the other girl I've yet to meet yet, but we're really, really close, and she's in London. And she's a woman of color as well, speaker coach. And it changed my life, because they were also my similar age, where the Speakers Association in Singapore, everyone was 20 to 30 years older than me. And so all this social media marketing, they didn't understand it. They thought it was actually a deficit to my credibility versus what it has been, which is, because of COVID, if you don't have online content, you're out of the game, right? So I would encourage anyone to get that connection. And the last point on the difference between the genders that I perceive in all of this is when I watch my partner and I watch a lot of his friends talk about materialistic things, and I don't know what it is. They're also a different generation to you, okay? So they're 40s and 50s. And this whole rhetoric about having purpose, social impact, being of service, that's millennial. Like that, they don't have that. Like for them, it's like, how much did I take home? Did I get a bonus? Did I buy the car? Do I have the pretty girlfriend? Like it's so different. And I find that very alienating. So I do put my nose in books, and listen to a lot of podcasts and talk with people like you, because that is the generation of business leaders behind us. And it's my job to go into corporations and inspire the next generation when I speak, even if it's on connection. Like I still need to be at the pulse of what's happening, and also have buy-in with that pulse, believe that new rhetoric about purpose and mission, which I absolutely do, because I'm living proof, and you are living proof, that it's possible to earn a really decent income doing what you love and helping people. But they were not sold that. They were sold a totally different dream. And I don't think it makes them that happy. Because if you don't hit those monetary targets, then you're meant to perceive yourself as less valuable. That's a terrible way to live.
I mean, the most valuable company in the world, Apple, is mission driven, so.
Exactly. That's why tech is where it's at, my friend.
But have you ever walked into the offices of one of those Silicon Valley companies, like a Google or an Apple?
I've spoken for Google. It was one of my first speeches. You can see it on my website, simoneheng.com, and it's incredible. Like it was an event for women, and it was lovely, really nice.
I spoke at the Zurich office once.
Wow.
They invited me for they had a startup event there in their office, and they gave me a tour. It's like 4 stories and everything.
Incredible.
It was fascinating what they do. Like they had like fresh eggs and everything in the lunch area, and they had Zen pods and it's crazy. First time I had an exposure towards a Silicon Valley tech company.
Yeah, it's beautiful what they do.
I wanted to cover quickly the thing that you mentioned, the accountability group, those women. That sounds like an accountability group,
No,
right?
I have another group for that. But yes, ask me about that, because I'm about to do a post on that soon.
Yeah, could you cover then both the accountability group and the women? How often do you do it? What do you guys talk about? And also the most important part, which is you are hanging out with essentially competitors, from what I understand, the speaker coach. So how does that dynamic work? Don't you feel like you're clashing, could you elaborate, please?
Yeah, so there is a group that I have here in Singapore with 4 female speakers from the Speakers Association. One of them is one of the women that also belongs to my international group, the group that I mentioned earlier. But we meet physically in person. Obviously not during COVID, but we met recently because we were allowed to. Now they've tightened things up, but we meet every quarter. And the rules for setting up a mastermind are that people need to be, like I mentioned before, similar income earning bracket, similar stage in the business to you, and everyone has to come with, Lewis Howes talks about this all the time in his book, you need to have rules that the attitude and the feeling of the group is one of sharing and enriching versus competition. So people have to share resources. So the girls were the ones that told me, hey, this B2C courageous speaking thing, they gave me confidence to buy the name courageousspeaking.com. We share resources all the time, online courses and things like that. And it's been life-changing. I can't tell you how important it is. Only one of the other women in the group speaks on communications, the same stuff as me, but my biggest point that I think I mentioned really early is that as a speaker or someone moving in the expert space, the number one valuable thing besides having thoughts, because you're meant to be a thought leader, is that you have an original perspective on whatever topic. So we're both coaching in communication, but the human connection slant that I bring to my public speaking training is different from her linguistics background. So she works with a lot of people where English is a second language. She has a linguistics degree. So we don't actually step on each other's toes at all, and are always there to help each other. Like if she has a client who's Aussie and they're saying this word wrong the whole time, she'll be like, is this how it's said in Australia? So we just help each other. And I think, I just recorded a video on this before we got on here, but I think when you've been raised in a very competitive environment, like I was raised in a hugely competitive household, it sends you into fight or flight where you perceive people as your competition where they don't have to be. And how fruitful my life became when I stopped being competitive and I started being collaborative. The amount of recommendations, resources that I've been sent by wholeheartedly helping others. Envy is the arrow to what you want to do. Next time you see someone online you're envious at, that is just the arrow telling you to get off your butt to do something that you actually admire in them. And that's not my quote, by the way. It's by Glennon Doyle Melton, who's one of my favorite authors. But it changed my life, that quote. And I was like, next time I see a girl that I envy, I'm going to throw my weight behind her, follow her, support her, join her membership, learn how to do what she's doing, which I have with a girl in Australia who's mega beautiful, who has a Instagram community. She's now my Instagram coach, which is how I learned how to do my content properly. And we've now become really good friends, and it's changed my life. And she's 2 years younger than me, so we're similar age group, similar space, teaching different things. So my biggest advice is to go from competition to collaboration. Yeah. Pretty sure Bill Gates and Steve Jobs were friends, right?
Yeah, the Windows, they created Microsoft Office on the Mac in the beginning. Well, I think they weren't enemies for sure because they collaborated so many times. I think the people supporting Windows and Mac were more clashing
exactly.
than
And when they got into older age, they weren't still thinking about those things, you know.
But I mean, I've read the autobiography. There were some clashes, but I mean, haven't you ever fought with Francis? So I think it's similar there. I wanted to ask about where's the limits within an accountability group, especially when you have similar niches. Would you, for instance, share your Facebook analytics with someone that is in the same niche? Would you set a limit if somebody is in the same, human connection niche as you, like, or is it really just all sharing? And maybe a follow-up question to that then is, do you find other women to be of the same mindset as you in general?
So the first thing is, I've actually had an incident come up with one of the women in the group where I asked her for if I could have the contact of the person who was doing her LinkedIn. One time she had a LinkedIn outreach person. And so she actually just said, I'm really sorry, it's kind of a conflict because we're in the same niche. And that was totally fine. Like, I appreciate people being like, hey, this is my boundary, versus overstepping the boundary. And then I had another lady in the group, and I don't think she meant anything by it at all, try and hire, like, I recommended her my assistant, because my assistant just works part-time for lots of different people, right? And then she tried to offer my assistant a full-time job. And that was really kind of difficult anyway, my assistant turned it down because she's too entrepreneurial to work for a person anyway. But, those were a couple of moments that it was difficult. But if you're mature and the other woman is mature, the benefits from the group are so much greater than small things like that. I mean, those things are nothing. I mean, for a mature adult, those things are nothing. If you want to be immature, yeah, they can get blown up, right? But I'm the human connection person. I'd rather have good women who support me than sacrifice that over like two incidences. Do I think all women are like that? No. With my mindset, because I wasn't like this. It took me years of personal development therapy to become like this. And I've had women that I've lost along the way who perceived me as their competition when I wasn't. And I was like, honey, I would rather have you as my friend any day of the week than, you sending me unsupportive messages about some sort of work or thing I've done, because I know there's a hint of jealousy. So no, I don't think everyone is like that, but I think everyone eventually gets there. It just takes maybe a bit of age and maturity.
You cover something really important, which I think is also very relevant for men. Somebody tried to overstep the boundary, of course. Let's put it that way as an example. Tried to hire your assistant. And then you said if both are mature, then everything's fine. But yet in business, multiple times I've found that a lot of people tend to say, oh, it's just business, not personal. And I found as I progressed through my career, it's always personal. It's never just business. So the people that say that haven't done business long enough, I think. But so how do you deal, as in your case, human connection is, your number one focus. If she wasn't mature, I'm pretty sure you've had examples like that in the past. How do you deal with that?
I think that the compassionate response is always the best response. So, So the human response is always the right response. So I always try and think of what's happening in the person's life right now that might have led to this. Are there factors, mitigating factors that that I should be permissive about and give them? It could be a really bad day. It could be a death in the family. There are things happening that you just don't know about. So firstly, find out if there are those things happening. Maybe the person won't be vulnerable enough to admit it right now, but maybe in a year's retrospect, they're going to give you a call, and it's happened in my life, give you a call and say, hey, I was going through a really shitty time and I took it out on you and I'm really sorry. You might bump into them at a networking event and they're very warm to you. They might not want to apologize, but you can tell there's been a shift. I think more often than not, people are essentially acting out of fear or insecurity when something happens where they're jealous or they've done something to slight your business or take a staff member away or anything like that. The woman I'm particularly talking about in the pod is a deeply secure woman and much more successful than me in her role outside of speaking, because she does stuff beyond that. And so I knew it wasn't at all her trying to, we couldn't be more different. And that is, one point I didn't say about the mastermind. Don't pick people that are similar to you. So even my friend who coaches communications, she's blonde American. We're not even visually in the same niche. Equally as successful as you, but in a different lane. That makes the best mastermind. So back to this thing of how you would handle it. So connection says, we're human beings at the end of the day. We need each other's safety in numbers. I would find out if anything's going on in the background of their life. Work out how often will I have to bump into this person again. You see, having blowouts and saying nasty things that you can't take back, when you are in the same field where you will have to bump into the person speaking on a panel, having to meet at a networker, it's going to cause you also a lot of drained energy later if you have an immediate triggered response. And I know this personally because before I started doing the personal development work and speaking on this, I did that. I was very, very reactive. And when I stopped being reactive and I started playing the long game, because you will bump into these people again, and then it's just going to be stressful for you, like having to sit on a panel with someone that you had a falling out with. So play the long game. If you care about your business on a business level, give the compassionate response, even if at that moment you really want to shout at them and be terrible. And if they're going to be a bit of a dick and be like, oh, it's just business, and you want to tell them, no, it's not. People have to come to their own awakening that it isn't just about business. Like, there is more to it than that. They have to come to that realization at another time in their journey. And maybe they'll learn it from the incident with you, or maybe they'll learn it later. But in that moment, your job is to be compassionate. Once you find out whether they're going through a hard time or not, the next step is to self-preserve for you and your business. So represent your business well. Make sure that you leave it diplomatically, because you may have to bump into them, you may have to see them again, and you might be in the same office at an investor that you both want. You might be sitting there. You just want it to be as little energy draining for you as possible later on. And then, of course, leave them like an opening later on. If they come back and they do apologize, leave them that opening and be gracious and accept it.
I really want to go deeper into this. Sorry, maybe it's an insecurity of mine or something, but I find that the more successful I become, the less I want to tolerate somebody diplomatically, as you mentioned. And it's like the more successful I get, the less I care. I just don't want to be around people that trigger me. And so
well, that's
I'm
very
fine
honest
with,
of you.
yeah, I find when they apologize and it's a genuine apology, because if I truly rub people the wrong way, and I find that an apology with words doesn't mean anything, actions speak louder than words. So I will try my best to apologize. And so I project the way I act towards other people. And so when I see people that don't really own up to something, I'd rather just not have those people in my life. But you're mentioning to have a diplomatic relationship and everything. Don't you feel like still in the back of your mind there is that trigger? They haven't actually, they're still pissing you off, kind of?
No. I'm not meaning that you have a diplomatic relationship. I'm saying you have a diplomatic ending. So basically, you're ending off the interaction in which, because you've obviously had a confrontation. That's what we're talking about, right? Somebody's done, yeah. Yeah, but you're ending it off in a dignified way so that you don't have that energy around it. That doesn't mean you still have to call them up and hang out with them. And it's hard for me because I know that might be an actual example that I don't know the details of, but I think wherever possible, try not to burn bridges. Like try, and I understand what you mean. I get moments now where I feel the happier that I am, the less tolerant I am. And when that happens, I call my therapist and I book an hour and I say, I'm losing my humility and we need to have a chat, because that's self-connection. And that's one of the things that I love as you get older. You're like, am I a little bit imbalanced? Am I getting a bit indignant here? Because I'm like you, babe. I do have moments where I think, well, why aren't they doing things like me? But other people aren't you. And my partner's really good at reminding me of that. And so if we want to connect with people on some level, we have to be tolerant as well. So tolerance and humility is in real short supply in the world. And if you can make yourself a tolerant and humble leader, it's going to pay dividends in this future where there's going to be less connection than we've ever had before, for example. So I would play the long game. We do something here in Asia called giving face. And maybe that's why I'm a lot better at it now than when I lived in Australia, because culturally it's much more accepted here that you maintain, by giving face, you maintain the other person's dignity and your own. And it's one of the techniques that has allowed my business to do so well in such a short amount of time, is that even when things happen, I just still give face. I'm still very pleasant, even though maybe inside I am hurting and I'm mad and I want to lash out. I might write it in my diary and get it out. But what that does do is when I calm down later, it leaves that door open should any sort of business or opportunities or anything else come through with that person. And I think that that's also important. It's not so you be best buddies with them. It's also so that you protect your reputation as a leader.
No, I think what you said, that resonates way more with me, because even though I'm mad at people, I always end it diplomatically, but I would never tolerate them around me after I've ended.
Yes, I'm not asking you to go jump back in the swimming pool with them. Yeah.
Yeah, I would never insult or anything. I would just be like, "Hey, this isn't working out. Don't want you around me. Like, that's it, done." But so I really like that part where he said ending it diplomatically. Maybe I'm a little bit brasher, I guess, in my interactions. How would you end things diplomatically? Do you have an example, a story to share?
Yeah, I have. I had a girlfriend that I found out was when I first started being a speaker was not saying very nice things about me, and the person who told me was actually her sister, which made it really awkward. So if I had confronted her, then I could possibly have blown up her entire relationship with her sister, which I have a sister and I know how important that relationship is. I didn't want to do that. So I was stuck in a bind. I was really hurt by this person. How do I tell them that I'm hurting without outing their sister? And causing a rift in that relationship, because that's quite a betrayal too that the sister did. And then I sat back and I thought about it, and I was like, there's obviously some toxicity there with their relationship that I'm being brought into, and do I want that toxicity in my life going forward? And I realized I'm going to sacrifice myself so that they can have a relationship. So it was actually the birthday of that girl, and I had a present made for her, and I was meant to be seeing her. And what I did was I wrapped up the presents and everything and I sent them to the house. And I was leaving on a trip like a few days after the birthday. And I said, look, I'm really sorry. I think there's a bit of tension here. I think I need to take a bit of a time out. But I'll see you when I get back from the holiday. And I went off on this holiday and I met up with some girlfriends of mine from when I lived in Switzerland. I used to study there. And we have this really deep connection that has lasted for 20 years. And it also was a reminder to me of what true connection felt like. And I started really reflecting on that relationship. And I started thinking, maybe going back as well and hanging out with this person isn't healthy for you either. So I came back and I just let the time pass. And I think she got the idea too. I was hoping in that time she'd come and apologize for, having been a little bit testy over text. But my reaction, she will never know till the day she dies why my reaction was the way it was, because I cannot out that her sister told me that stuff. And so I've since had to moderate panels and stuff online with her, and I'm always really nice, and I always just send the message. But I think we both have the idea that we're just better off not in each other's lives, and that we've moved on. And I think that that's totally fine. So that's how I did it. I had already gotten her present and everything, so I'm not it already had a nice card in it. I just sent it to her house in a delivery, and we just leave it as that. So that's how I've handled those things, because as much as I love her enough to let her have a good relationship with her sister. That is more important than me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that truly shows the human connection side of you, where it's very mature, very meta. You're thinking, okay,
Long term, right?
yeah, very long term. Yeah, that's definitely something that I aspire to more and more. Um, I think there's something to be said with what you said about the Asian culture with saving face and all of that. I think that's something, especially the more west you go, it's a bigger problem.
And just one point of the giving face thing. Look, I don't think it's always a good thing, and I talk in my human connection work about like when we want to show joy, giving face and pretending we're less enthusiastic than we are, which is very common here as well, is not a great thing. But in an altercation where you're deeply angry, giving face allows you to put your response into delay. It just gives you that extra 45 to 1 minute to cool the F down before making a really potentially big mistake. So it's useful in that way.
Yeah, I definitely learned to do that in business. I was in the beginning, I think the first year, way more emotional. I think it's been now like 8 years or something. So now I pretty much do what you said. And what I really, really loved is that diplomatic ending thing. I think that's just such an important thing. Because at the end of the day, what I learned is you don't gain anything. It's a lose-lose situation if you just burn bridges. Because you're just bringing people down.
Yeah, and it's undignified.
Yeah, you're just embarrassing yourself at that point. And a diplomatic ending is just, hey, I don't want this energy around me. Go live your life. I live my life. No, that I really like that. I really, really wanted to ask a bit more practical questions. I'm loving these discussions, but I want to ask more practical questions about the whole speaker thing, the speaker business, setting that up. How is that different than for instance any other business? How are you doing things differently? What influencers are you following to make it successful? What are some practical things you're doing as a speaker to get speaking gigs or something? I can imagine. I'd love to hear.
Yeah, sure. But I do have to say this will have to be my last question. My last question is I do have to host a mastermind, a group coaching after this. But so, I mean, the first priority for any speaker is like get good at speaking. That is the first thing. Get really good at speaking. Get really good at your message and executing that message. That's the most important thing. Everybody wants 5-figure speaking gigs. 6 figures if you're Michelle Obama, okay? But for the rest of us, everyone wants 5-figure speaking gigs. And when that becomes your priority over the message and over the execution of your message, you're in bad territory there. So just with that as a highlight point. So at the beginning of my work in speaking, I was approaching bureaus. Now, a lot of bureaus, and so I have a couple of bureaus that represent me around the world, 3 or 4. The problem is with bureaus is that they've all had a really, really tough time during COVID. And because we're in this online economy now, clients just come directly to my website. So as a result of that, I guess the bureau tactic, I don't know how intelligent that would be for me to recommend that. It definitely is not a top priority for me until everything goes back to normal. Definitely in the current economy, get really good at speaking on camera. That's been a real blessing because I've come from a broadcasting background, because all your keynotes will be online now. So you need to be really good at communicating your messages online. The speaking game is interesting. I think that the old model of speaking used to be you're speaking on stages, you've flown around the world, you speak on stages, and you have books and you promote those books. But that whole business model, I think, has really changed. I think you have to have a strong digital presence. So I think, again, going back to what we said earlier, build that niche, share your message online. And what else did you want to know, my dear, that I haven't answered?
What influencers are you following, and yeah, what's your business model like?
So my business model is the different verticals of my business are the keynote speeches. Most keynote speakers will have these business models. Okay, well, are they verticals, or are they things that you have to do? One of the verticals is you should be like an online kind of influencer, like a Lewis Howes or a Marie Forleo. You need to be producing content. Whether that content is paid or not, it might just be to build your following at first. You need to have a book for credibility. You also need to be an online course creator. That's changed everything for me. That contributes about, a third of my income is the online programs, and we haven't even started boosting them on ads yet. But I can tell you what a difference that made between when I first left pre-COVID, so about the first year where I didn't have online stuff, to what it is now. That feeling of security as a speaker that you get by having that money coming in from those online things is amazing. And so I would recommend everyone to be doing some sort of online programs. Then you have coaching, which is like one-on-one coaching, and then of course your keynote speeches. So that's kind of how the experts like Brendan Burchard suggest to do a speaking business, and definitely in my experience versus the old business model, I think it's a much better tactic to financial stability and variety. I would get bored if I just did speeches and nothing else. I love the connection of giving back to people, and watching people grow and change through coaching it's priceless. It's amazing.
I love that. I think based on that, we can definitely wrap up, because it's been a ton of golden nuggets.
Oh, I hope so.
Yeah, it definitely was. I'd love to roll out the red carpet for you. Do you have anything to promote? Where can people find you?
Sure. I would love, if you want to learn about becoming a professional speaker, for example, you can contact me on my Instagram to DM. I do one-on-one coaching to transform people from, they're industry experts but into paid speakers. I also have this community, which is super, super affordable, and it's called Courageous Speaking. So you can go to courageousspeaking.com, and I'm also on LinkedIn.
Are you very reachable on LinkedIn for
Very
people?
reachable on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Then I want to thank you for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much, my dear, and hope everything cools down in Europe.
If you like this episode, you can check out our most recent one here. And if you haven't already, make sure you click here to subscribe and see the next one. But if you're interested in more tips and tricks, then make sure to join our Facebook group, where you can find thousands of like-minded people and you get direct access and support to